The 2025 NHL Draft Lottery goes down this evening. I'll go through all the possible outcomes for the Blackhawks, and we'll get into the latest updates on their head coaching search.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Quick reminder off the jump to go and hit that like button. Hop in the comments section below. Unfortunately, no Mailbag Monday here today as there's just simply too much to get to instead, but I will be running it back as normal next week. Make sure to hit me with your Mailbag Monday questions. And of course, subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. All of that is 100% free, will not cost you anything, and helps me out in a massive way in growing my platform. And one final shout out that I got to give as well goes out to today's sponsor, which is Game Time. Go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. It's another big day for the Chicago Blackhawks rebuild as the 2025 NHL Draft Lottery will go down on ESPN this evening at 6 p.m. Central Time, and will actually have the drawing process be televised live for the first time in its 30-year history. It's a little bit of a complicated process. The NHL actually released a video that will explain it much better than I will in terms of the combinations of the ping pong balls and how teams get eliminated and all that stuff. Make sure to go and check it out. The NHL released a video on its YouTube channel going through everything. But of course, we know the Blackhawks have the second best odds of winning tonight's NHL Draft Lottery after having the second worst record in the regular season, besting only the San Jose Sharks. And what that means for the Blackhawks, what does having the second best overall odds mean? That gives them a 13.5% chance of winning the number one overall pick, just like they had last year. They have a 14.1% chance of staying home at number two, a 30.7% chance of sliding down one spot to number three, and a 41.7% chance of going all the way down to number four. So they do have a better chance of falling than staying home or moving up to number one, but that has been the case the last couple of years, and the NHL Draft Lottery has treated the Blackhawks pretty kindly. So hoping that's going to be the case again here this year. And on the bright side, the Hawks will not pick worse than fourth in the 2025 NHL draft. They cannot be bumped out of the top four in the draft lottery this evening. As far as all the teams' odds for winning the number one overall pick, as I mentioned, the San Jose Sharks were the only team that had a worse record in the regular season than the Blackhawks. That gives them a 25.5% chance of staying home and getting the number one overall selection. The Blackhawks at number two have a 13.5% chance, like I mentioned. The Nashville Predators shocked everyone this year by being the third worst team in all of hockey, giving them an 11.5% chance of winning the number one overall pick. The Philadelphia Flyers in the fourth spot, giving them a 9.5% chance. The Boston Bruins are next. Boy, did they really fall off hard there in the second half of the season. However, could be good for the turnaround of the franchise as they have an 8.5% chance of winning the draft lottery. Seattle is next at 7.5%. Buffalo follows after them at 6.5%, and then Anaheim's at 6%. Philadelphia's at 5%. The New York Islanders have a 3.5% chance, and then the New York Rangers round things out with a 3% chance of winning the draft lottery. Because of some changes that have been made in recent years, those are the only teams that can wind up with the number one overall pick in this year's draft, unless, of course, a trade goes down before the draft actually begins. As far as all the possible outcomes for the Blackhawks this evening and talking through all of them, while, usually winning the draft lottery is the ideal outcome, and I do think that would still be beneficial for the Blackhawks because of the reasons I'll get into. There are some complications about what selection the Blackhawks want to come away with, but if they do win this year's draft lottery, it's obviously still a good thing. You're never going to be upset about having the first overall pick. However, it would put the Blackhawks, because of their prospect pool in particular, it would put them in a little bit of a conundrum because at this point, Matthew Schaefer is pretty much the consensus number one overall pick. It's not as set in stone as Connor Bedard or Macklin Celebrini the last couple of years, but he's the odds-on favorite at this point in time. And because the Blackhawks already have a pretty deep pipeline on the back end, in the left side, they have Alex Vlasic, Kevin Korchinski, Wyatt Kaiser, Nolan Allen, Ethan Del Mastro. That's not necessarily a need for the Blackhawks. However, Matthew Schaefer, obviously he's only 17 years old, still tons of runway, even younger than Bedard and Celebrini, who were young kids getting picked number one overall. So there's lots of time to develop Matthew Schaefer. And like I said, probably the consensus number one overall pick. However, with the Blackhawks really needing a running mate along with Connor Bedard, it feels like the candidate that most Blackhawks fans, including myself, would love them to wind up with in this year's draft is Michael Misa. And taking him over Matthew Schaefer, while, the Blackhawks certainly could do that at number one, it's not as clear-cut. As again, it becomes a little bit conflicting. However, number one, I still believe would be the second best outcome, undoubtedly, for the Blackhawks in the 2025 NHL Draft Lottery here tonight. I honestly think they would probably go with Michael Misa if they wind up with the number one overall pick. But again, it becomes a much more intriguing conversation as opposed to the most ideal outcome would be they just stay home at number two for the second consecutive year. And the reason for that is, again, Matthew Schaefer probably is going to be the number one pick in this year's draft, especially if the San Jose Sharks wind up staying home at number one. That just easily allows Michael Misa to fall into the Blackhawks' lap. And I really do believe that's the player they want to take in this draft class. An incredible season for him in the OHL. Could be ready to make the leap to the NHL already. And there's not really many other of those guys in this draft class. And of course, the Blackhawks' biggest need is another high-level, top-line caliber forward along with Connor Bedard. Michael Misa checks off that box. I think the third best outcome for the Blackhawks tonight would be moving down one spot and coming away with the third overall pick. Things do get a little bit more complicated for them here, though, because in my opinion, it's a pretty clear-cut top two in this draft class. Then things get a little bit tricky. You want to have a top two selection in the 2025 NHL draft. Not to say number three is a bad spot for the Blackhawks, but it's not as ideal as one of the top two. And the players that could go at number three, there's a handful of them. James Higgins, Porter Martone, someone who has size and skill. That's been very intriguing to a lot of Hawks fans, as well as Caleb Denoye and Anton Frondell as well. Both of those guys have seemingly had their draft stocks rise, while a guy like James Higgins didn't necessarily go and have the best freshman season with Boston College. That would be the third best outcome for the Blackhawks. The worst outcome, again, not the end of the world, as they fall all the way down to number four, because that's another player off of the board, obviously, in front of them at number three. In addition to missing out on one of those top two selections, they will still come away with a very good player if they fall all the way to number four. But it would definitely be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, considering we've, as Blackhawks fans, have been thinking long about Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer. If you fall at number four, you're not going to be coming away with one of those two guys unless Kyle Davidson works his magic via a trade. But like I mentioned, the NHL Draft Lottery, the ping pong ball gods have treated us kindly the last 2 years. In the 2023 Draft Lottery, the Blackhawks had the third best odds to win the number one overall pick. They did, and of course selected Connor Bedard to be the new face of the franchise. And then last year, while they unfortunately missed out on the Macklin Celebrini sweepstakes, still fared pretty well in the lottery by staying home at number two. An outcome, again, I think a lot of us Blackhawks fans would relish here this evening. But there's everything to know before the ping pong balls start bouncing on ESPN for those of you who will be watching in America at 6 p.m. Central Time. For those of you up in Canada, you're used to things getting broadcasted on TSN. That's exactly where it will be. Hope the ping pong ball gods continue to treat us nicely here this evening, but there is everything to know before the action begins and the Blackhawks' possible outcomes tonight at the NHL Draft Lottery. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll get into the latest updates on the Blackhawks head coaching search as Mike Sullivan is now off the market. But first, I do got to talk to you all real quick about Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, Where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's really easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in. And Monarch Money is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and complete control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center so that you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place and stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And what I personally love about Monarch is that instead of juggling multiple financial apps at the same time, you can just use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. So go and take control of your finances right now with Monarch Money by using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL when you go to monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off on your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com with our code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for half off on your first year. I also got to talk to you real quick about the fine folks over at Game Time. The Stanley Cup Playoffs have gotten off to an incredible start, and if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's truly unlike anything you've ever experienced. The intensity, the speed, the atmosphere, and energy in the building, it's simply next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is now easier and more affordable than ever. And Game Time is the fastest way for you to grab playoff tickets, especially for those must-see second-round matchups. And prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% for your playoff tickets. And here's what I love about Game Time. The app shows you panoramic seat views so you know exactly what to expect, before you arrive and also before you make your purchase. So go and take the guesswork out of buying playoff tickets with Game Time. All you got to do, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps, and you'll get $20 off on your first purchase. Again, that's the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Game Time. Segment 2. Well, Blackhawks fans, it has not been an ideal start for the Blackhawks vacant head coaching job here in the offseason, as David Carl, of course, as I broke down last week, first removed himself from the Hawks job, which, interesting to see, I believe he took an interview with the Anaheim Ducks for their head coaching position. Don't have any confirmation that Carl has done any more interviews, and of course, we're not even sure that he's going to be leaving Denver at this point. Recent reports suggest that he's actually going to be staying this year, which takes me as a little bit of a surprise considering all he's accomplished there. And, you know, he already removed himself from being the head coach for the World Juniors next year. Sure seems like he did that in anticipation of taking on an NHL head coaching job for the first time, but hasn't happened up to this point. And I would have figured with Carl being, you know, before Mike Sullivan, the most sought after name on the market, he probably would have at least given more interviews than he has at this point in time. And I wouldn't have even been surprised to have seen him been hired at this point. But obviously we know that's not going to be happening to the Blackhawks. We'll see if Carl even winds up going to the NHL. As I said, reports sound like that's not happening. But now, to make matters worse, Mike Sullivan, another man that I did believe was going to be in contention for the Blackhawks job, I thought for many different reasons, even though, yes, Mike Sullivan is usually a coach that's been playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Blackhawks aren't quite there in their rebuild. I still thought there were many reasons for him to be among the favorites, to be the Blackhawks to be the favorites in terms of spots where Mike Sullivan was going to go. But he quickly went off the market. As I've said many times when covering this Blackhawks head coaching search, things can change in a hurry, as Sullivan has already been taken off the market by the New York Rangers. And according to reports, he'll become the highest paid coach in the entire NHL and will also be bringing in John Tortorella as an assistant. So there goes Mike Sullivan. And I know some people were wondering about John Cooper possibly after the Tampa Bay Lightning got dusted in 5 games by the Florida Panthers, as I'll be breaking down in segment 3. Blackhawks fans, make sure to stick with me as I get into an update on my Stanley Cup playoff bracket and just a phenomenal first round overall. But John Cooper, there were some people wondering if whether or not his time could be done in Tampa, as they've had a couple of early exits in the Stanley Cup playoffs after winning back-to-back Stanley Cups. I thought it would have been crazy for Cooper to get fired at this point. Had he have gotten fired by Tampa, I mean, Blackhawks had to have been all in on him, as many other teams would have. But that's not happening. John Cooper, at least, again, at this point, things can change in a hurry. But based on interviews following the Lightning being knocked out, seems like John Cooper is going to be sticking around for at least one more year. And that now takes a lot of the top options that I had personally off of the market. Mike Sullivan, David Carl, two guys that I really wanted the Blackhawks to make a strong push for, are not in the mix any longer. And I don't know if the Blackhawks have started conducting interviews behind closed doors. I remember last time when they were looking for Luke Richardson, I believe interviews were kind of being announced, at least based on reports from many NHL sources. We haven't heard the same at this point. Now we've already seen, a couple of dominoes go off the board. The Blackhawks got to get on this. And maybe there are interviews already taking place, and Kyle Davidson obviously was outspoken about being on top of this process and finishing up things before the beginning of June, like they did with Luke Richardson. But they got to get on this right here, right now, because the dominoes are starting to fall, and I know things can change in a hurry, but the top options are being plucked away right now. I do wonder if, Jared Bednar, the head coach of the Colorado Avalanche, considering their shortcomings since winning the Stanley Cup last, I do wonder if his name could be available in the next couple of weeks. However, in a similar manner to John Cooper, I think that would be a crazy move for the Avalanche to make at this point, even if they have underwhelmed in the Stanley Cup playoffs the last couple of years. So to me, Blackhawks fans, as I've been pretty outspoken about, there's now only really two candidates that I love at this point. One of those is Todd Nelson. He has now become my number one guy, with David Carl officially out of the picture and Mike Sullivan being hired by the Rangers. Todd Nelson is personally my number one guy. Jay Woodcroft has been bumped up to number two. A guy like Rick Tocchet, maybe he becomes a little bit more intriguing, even though I explained a couple of days ago, he doesn't really move the needle for me. Gerard Gallant is a name that really hasn't gotten a ton of buzz at this point, particularly with the Blackhawks job. Same with Peter Laviolette. Maybe those are two options to go and look at, but again, doesn't seem like those are names that are being targeted based on multiple reports from Blackhawks reporters and whatnot, and also based on where the Blackhawks are at in the rebuild with those types of coaches. I don't think it's the most likely match at this point. I know people haven't been happy with me saying this because of the results with the Blackhawks not getting David Carl and not getting Mike Sullivan, when me and I know a lot of other Blackhawks podcasts said it felt pretty likely. So because they obviously didn't get hired here, there have been some unhappy people in my comment section, but I'm not going to divulge away from the reasoning why I still think the Blackhawks job should be intriguing. Yes, it's not a New York Rangers-like situation, but even though this team is still a couple of years away, there's a lot to work with. The youth movement, the tons of money that they have to spend, and you expect them to be very active in the free agent market these next few years. The tons of money that they can give to their next head coach, the slew of draft picks and the capital that they have in the prospect pool. It's still a very intriguing job, in addition to this being an original six franchise. But make no mistake about it, Blackhawks fans, this has not been an ideal start to their head coaching search, and they got to get on this process right here, right now. I'm sure Kyle Davidson is doing more work than what's just kind of being reported right now, as there hasn't been a lot of news going out in terms of the Blackhawks giving interviews. That's got to start ramping up if it's not already happening, because dominoes are starting to fall. Guys are starting to move. I know still things can happen here over these next couple of weeks, but the Blackhawks got to get on this sooner rather than later, because more of these guys are just going to get plucked away. I still think they're one of the more intriguing jobs out there on the market that works in their favor, but they got to start acting fast here as other teams are starting to make their moves. But there is the latest we have on the Blackhawks head coaching search. David Carl officially gone. Mike Sullivan over to the New York Rangers. John Cooper sounding like he's not leaving the Tampa Bay Lightning. we'll see what winds up happening with Jared Bednar and the Colorado Avalanche. But as I said, Todd Nelson, Jay Woodcroft, to me, are the two most intriguing names left on the free agent market. Coming up in just a moment, though, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap up today's episode, got to break down an absolutely electric first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all first about Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts who are ready to help take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses the flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or even a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. And what I love about Upwork is their cost-effective growth. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps you find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. And to go and check it out right now, all you got to do is visit Upwork.com and post your job post for free. Again, that's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and to grow your business today. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you real quick to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your week. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, up until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned, you can get local analysis on a national scale by checking out Locked On NHL Game Night, which is now available on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, as the first round of the playoffs came to the close over the weekend, definitely want to get into a recap of every single series, talk about how my bracket fared through the first round, and overall, just what an incredible first round we got to experience. And listen, the Stanley Cup playoffs never misses a beat, but this year in particular, the first round is always the best round. But this first round absolutely knocked my socks off. In particular, the 2 Game 7s that we got over the weekend, both were absolutely magical. Had to talk about it here on the show to kick off the weekend. Get into a little bit of an update on my bracket, but let's start with those 2 epic Game 7s over the weekend. The Winnipeg Jets last night, the comeback that they completed, down 2 goals with under 2 minutes to play. The Blues looked like they had them dead to rights. The home team had won each of the first 6 games. Jets go up 2-0. Of course, I have the Winnipeg Jets to win the Stanley Cup. You know, I'm not exactly a Jets fan, so I wasn't feeling what they were, but I was pretty nervous as the series started 2-0. I was feeling confident, but then, of course, St. Louis goes and wins games 3 and 4 in emphatic fashion to even up the series. Winnipeg bounces back with a home win in Game 5, but then Connor Hellebuck struggles in Game 6. But that was truly one of the most incredible comebacks I have ever seen. Nemesnikov starts it off with a little bit of a fortunate bounce, and then Cole Perfetti, who had an incredible goal just to get the Jets on the board on a redirect, shows off the mitts once again in the slot to tie it up with 1.6 seconds left to go. And if you go back and watch this highlight, I watched it, probably 50 times. The energy in the crowd, I love the Winnipeg whiteout, waving the towels. That place was absolutely buzzing. But as a Blackhawks fan, to see the reaction from all of those Blues players, Jordan Binnington head down, Robert Thomas, who had a chance to make a play on the puck with like 7 seconds left to go, wasn't strong enough on it, allows Nikolai Ehlers to get the puck back at the point and make that cross pass to Kyle Connor. Simply sensational. And then the game winds up going into double overtime. You know, the Jets definitely had all the momentum. I fully expected them to win that game after St. Louis suffered that heartbreaker in regulation. But Connor Hellebuck stepped up to the plate and made some big-time saves there late in the third period and in overtime. And then Adam Lowry, the captain, winds up having a deflection go off his pants for the game winner. Huge celebration. Crowd goes absolutely nuts. One of the best hockey games that I have ever seen, and that's coming off of one of the best hockey games I'd ever seen the night before between the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche. And as someone who, A, picked the Colorado Avalanche to win this series in 6 games, and B, as someone who's been high on the Dallas Stars for the last 3 years in my Stanley Cup brackets, as I mentioned when previewing my bracket this year, I believe I had the Stars to win the Stanley Cup in 2 of the last 3 years. It killed me to pick against them in this first round, but they didn't have Jason Robertson. They didn't have Miro Heiskanen. Colorado was coming in with some good momentum. I took Colorado in 6 games, and shame on me. And what an incredible Game 7. Again, another team in Colorado that looked like they had the Stars dead to rights, only for who else but Mikko Rantanen to have the period of his life. After having a 4-point period in a losing effort in Game 6, he has it in a more meaningful third period in Game 7 to help the Stars claw all the way back. Hat trick for Mikko Rantanen, including the empty netter to seal the deal. Absolutely electric call on the broadcast. The Stars fans were going rowdy, and Nathan McKinnon called it the worst loss of his professional career. I definitely understand why, because they had him, as the St. Louis Blues did. But that's why the Stanley Cup playoffs are truly unlike any other, and that's why you never give up, even if it looks like you're completely toast. 2 incredible Game 7s over the weekend, and now we get to see both of those teams face off here in the second round. Of course, we did have 2 other series go down in the Western Conference as the Vegas Golden Knights bested the Minnesota Wild in 6 games, exactly as I predicted. I just thought Vegas's depth was ultimately going to be too much. However, the return of Kirill Kaprizov and Joel Eriksson Ek was huge for the Wild early on in that series, but Vegas and their experience just really came through there late. They wind up getting the job done in 6 games. And then the Edmonton Oilers also got the job done in 6 games over the Los Angeles Kings. LA will really be kicking themselves for, it was that Game 4 loss. Game 4, Game 5, one of those 2 games. It was game 4. They had Edmonton absolutely dead to rights. Should have been up 3-1. Going back to LA, where they had been phenomenal on home ice all season. Instead, they gag it away late there, and the series winds up going in a different direction. I predicted Edmonton to get this done in 7 games. I'll take them getting it done in 6. As far as these Western Conference second round meetings, they're going to be absolutely incredible. My pre-tournament, pre-Stanley Cup prediction was I had Winnipeg taking down Colorado in 6 games. Obviously, they'll be meeting up with the Dallas Stars instead. I will say, for Dallas to get, they'll likely get Miro Heiskanen and Jason Robertson back here in the second round. Absolutely huge for their chances. However, even though Winnipeg is banged up, we'll see the status of Josh Morrissey and Mark Scheifele. That's going to be huge for them. But I do believe this is going to give them a huge boost of confidence. It was dicey for me. I did not feel good about them, especially in those final moments of regulation last night, in terms of having them as my Stanley Cup winner. But I do feel good about this group and the jolt of energy and confidence they're going to get from winning their first playoff series in quite a while. Hopefully they'll get healthier in the second round, but that's going to be an absolute banger of a matchup between the Jets and the Stars in round 2. I'll stick with the Winnipeg Jets, though, getting it done in 6 games. As far as Vegas versus Edmonton, I predicted Vegas to take down the Oilers in 6 games here. I'm sticking with that prediction once again. No reason to feel differently, in my opinion. Then moving out east, we saw the Toronto Maple Leafs take down the Ottawa Senators in 6 games with a great late effort there in the third period. I predicted the Leafs to get it done in 6 games, so that one definitely felt good. The only other first round matchup that I predicted incorrectly, Colorado was the first one. Shame on me for picking the Tampa Bay Lightning over the Florida Panthers. Shame on me as Florida absolutely dusts them and get the job done in 5 games. I had Tampa over Florida in 6. I just thought, man, all that wear and tear on this team, especially with all those guys that played in the 4 nations, the long Stanley Cup runs they've had the last 2 summers, not a very good final month of the regular season, coming into the playoffs a little bit banged up. I didn't think that was going to bode well for them against a Lightning team that was entering the playoffs with some good momentum. Clearly didn't matter though, and the Leafs are going to have their absolute hands full. That is also going to be a banger of a second round matchup. The other two series in the first round, Washington ended up besting Montreal in 5 games. I thought they were going to make easy work of them, although I had it getting it done in 6. And then Carolina beat New Jersey in 5. That was exactly as I predicted. I just knew without Jack Hughes, the Devils were going to have a really tough time scoring against that well-coached Carolina Hurricanes bunch. As far as the second round playoff series in the East, I predicted Toronto to win over Tampa in 7 games. Man, it's going to be tough for them. It's going to be tough for them against the physicality of this Florida Panthers bunch, but that's why they made the change to Craig Berube as their head coach. That's why they brought in some of the pieces they did to be more ready for that type of style. I don't feel great about it, but I'm going to stick with the Toronto Maple Leafs getting it done in 7 games, an epic Game 7 that is going to be. And then I'm sticking with the Washington Capitals getting it done over the Carolina Hurricanes in 5 games. I respect Rod Brind'Amour. I respect the hard effort of the Carolina Hurricanes players. I just don't respect that organization. And to see what Mikko Rantanen did for the Dallas Stars in that first round, not only was it a tough pill to swallow for Colorado Avalanche fans, couldn't have been easy for Carolina Hurricanes fans to see that either, even though they took care of New Jersey in easy fashion. Still has to be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow knowing that type of guy could also be on their roster, and those are the type of game changers you need in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I simply don't think they have enough of that, and Washington is just meshing so well as a group. I'm sticking with the Caps, getting it done. I think they'll probably get it done in 6, but I don't hate my pre-Stanley Cup prediction of them winning in 5. Shaping up to be another incredible round here in the Stanley Cup playoffs. We got a great little appetizer there in the first round. Energy and intensity is going to wrap up as the stakes only get higher. But that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. Until next time, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. Please, ping pong ball gods, treat us kindly here tonight, 6 p.m. Central Time, again on ESPN for those of you in America, on TSN for anyone watching in Canada, for the 2025 NHL Draft Lottery. I'll have a reaction to what goes down for the Blackhawks dropping early tomorrow morning. Until then, cheers, and I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.